El-Toukhy. I had the pleasure also of working with her when she was a doctoral student here. She grew up and was educated in Egypt, and for the first 10 years of her career worked with international NGOs doing health communication campaigns and also being a professor. And then she came for a year's fellowship to study with us here at the School of Journalism, and we were so impressed with her to the extent that she won this. I still find this hard to believe. So as a non-native speaker, she took the law course and won the AEJ-MC student law paper competition. Oh my God, that's who she is. And then the graduate school saw that and gave her a 5-year fellowship to do her doctoral studies. So I got to work with her as her doctoral advisor. Don Shaw also did. Sherine El-Toukhy did as well. And we're still just amazed by who she is as a scholar. And Rhonda, yes ma'am. So it was a great fun committee because she did what another member of her committee called the quintessential dissertation. And that's Raj Ramal from Johns Hopkins University, who said this is the best dissertation he ever read. So with Sherine, the problem is reining her in a little bit, getting her to think that, okay, the dissertation is just the first step, not the end of it all. She did 6 studies for her dissertation, and that's part of what we're going to hear about today. It's a wonderful program of research where she built on some of the early work and study that she had done in cognitive psychology and brought some of those concepts into the idea of health communication. So and in the process learned how to do very sophisticated measurement, and you'll hear more about that. So I'd like you to listen today, as this is pretty theoretical at this point, but the next steps in this program of research are to bring this back to the practice of health communication. So if you can listen to that, and also think about this as a program of research. So what she is doing is working through the conceptual steps of building then a very practical understanding of how best can we communicate to individuals about their health behaviors and the risk they face if they don't behave in healthy behavior. So thank you, Sherine.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, thank you, Dr. Brown. This is a very generous introduction, as usual. Sherine, thank you for inviting me, and everybody else, thank you very much for coming today. As Jane mentioned, today's topic is something that I am really very passionate about. It's what I consider my main area of research within health communication. This is an ad that is just one of many examples that we come across in the media every day about hepatitis C. And basically what health communication practitioners hope from an ad like that is for you or for the audience members to consider the risk factors. So here they're saying 5 million Americans have hepatitis. Do you? And they list several risk factors like unprotected sex, being exposed to infected blood, illicit drugs, and so forth. So again, they hope that the audience members will assess the risk factors and come to acknowledge the risk if they are at risk, and then eventually take behavioral steps, which is here to go get tested for hepatitis. But I am hoping from today's presentation to convince you that people's immediate reaction to an ad like the one we just saw is that it won't happen to me. In building an argument for that case, I am going to show you results from 6 different studies that I have done for my dissertation. Two of them are self-report studies, and then 4 of them are experiments. And then hopefully, if we have time, I will tell you a little bit about studies that I'm currently working on to address some of the shortcomings that I have found in my work, and also build on the strength and the interesting findings that we found, and hopefully give you some practical implications for the work that I'm doing. But first, allow me to tell you how it all started. As Dr. Brown mentioned, it all started back in Cairo University, by the way. So I was trained as a broadcast journalist in the School of Communication for 4 years, and then I graduated and got appointed in the school and started working on my master's thesis. So I wanted a topic for my master's thesis. So I said, okay, I'm going to do something about television news. I started reading several articles, and in those articles, authors were trying to measure people's memory, how much they recall, how much information they recall from television news, and see how much they have gained out of it. It turns out people don't remember that much. And they took that as an indication that television news is bad, it's basically unbeneficial, it's not worth it. So of course, as a broadcast person, I was like, that can't be right. So I wanted to design an experiment to see which message elements can we play with a little bit to make television news more effective. And by that, I just meant that people will just remember more of the television news. So that was where I started. And that's exactly what I did. So I designed an experiment, and there were some message elements that I actually manipulated. So for example, one version had emotionally arousing videos, whereas the other had neutral videos. But here is the moment that actually got me started into this whole thing. I wanted to control how much information people bring into the viewing situation beforehand. So one of the stories, for example, was about Iraq. So I wanted to see how much people know about that country before watching the television news or the news story, just to control for how much people know. So I had a battery of questions, and people answered those questions, and basically people turned out to have like very, very elaborate body of knowledge about that country, or they don't. So basically experts versus novices. And here is what I found. People attend to information in light of previously stored knowledge that we already have. And this knowledge, it's called knowledge structures or mental representations, or for short, schemas. And when we attend to new information, in this situation about Iraq, that mental representation or that schema about that country becomes active, so that it will help us interpret this incoming information. What the schema does is that it can lead a person to accept the message or reject the message, and in some very rare situations, the knowledge itself that we possess can be changed upon encountering new information. It's very rare. We typically hold on to what we believe in. Okay? So when people attend to the new information based on that knowledge structure that they have, the news story is no longer an objective stimuli. It becomes subjective, because we inject our knowledge, our beliefs, our attitudes into that stimulus, so it becomes subjective. So what I found, yes, people didn't remember the exact facts that were mentioned in the news story, but guess what? They added more information that was not even mentioned in the news story. And this was what I have read about, is that the knowledge structures that we have help us go beyond the information given and fill in the gaps. Okay? So I just want to show you what this mental representation, this is just a very, very schematic representation of how knowledge can be structured and stored in long-term memory. If we look here, we will see that there are nodes, like for example, this animal kingdom up on top. And you can see that there are members of this node. So for example, you see mammals, birds, fish, they all belong to that higher order node. And then each one of those has its own features and properties and so forth. One of the things that I want to highlight, because we'll get back to that in a minute when we talk about my studies, is that if you see the length of the link that connects the knot to its member, this basically represents whether the member is typical or atypical of that knot. So an example is always good. When we say bird, which is more typical, a canary or an ostrich? Canary. So it's shorter. So people link the two together easier compared to when I say ostrich. Yes, it's a bird, but we take a little bit of time to, oh yes, it's a bird, because it's larger, it doesn't fly, it doesn't have the characteristics that are most typical of birds. These knowledge structures, of course, become more complex as we have beliefs and attitudes injected into this. Okay. So during that time, as again Dr. Brown mentioned, I was working with nonprofits on health campaigns and environmental campaigns and so forth. We did a lot of message design and message testing. We also did a lot of evaluation, so we would measure attitudes, beliefs, knowledge, and so forth. One of the things that I became interested coming here to the United States, I wanted to follow up on health communication. I still wanted to measure outcomes of health campaigns, so I became interested in risk. As we saw in that ad, the ad is actually communicating a risk. It's telling you, you might be at risk for hepatitis. But what happens is that there are two estimates that, or basically two approaches to risk. There is objective risk, which is by medical standards. So for example, a smoker, based on how many cigarettes he smokes a day, how long he has been smoking, a physician can have an estimate of what are the chances he's going to get lung cancer. Okay? My doctor sent me, oh, you are 0.01 for heart attack. She put all the information in and she sent me that. So this is a medical estimate. However, people have a different estimate of the risk. So it's subjective. What we believe in, it's called risk perceptions. So basically, it's a subjective probability. What are the chances that I am going to get this disease? So the likelihood or the probability or the chance that I'm going to get that disease, this is what we call susceptibility. And then the other dimension is severity. Okay, if I get that disease, how severe or how bad, how harmful it would be to my life, to my, my everyday living, whatever. And typically, those two dimensions are combined together, and they form what we call risk perceptions. And as you see here, the scale is tipped a little bit toward the subjective risk perceptions, because when it comes to behavior, risk perceptions weigh more or have a more influence than objective risk. So again, if I am at risk for a heart attack by medical standards, but I don't believe that I am at risk, I am not going to take any steps to actually change my lifestyle so that I will eliminate or reduce that risk for heart attack. Okay? So it's really important that people acknowledge they are at risk. So risk perceptions are really important for many theories of behavior change. As I said, if I don't think that I am at risk, I will not take any behavioral steps to reduce or eliminate that risk. So one of the theories, for example, this is the health belief model. Other theories, theory of reason action, planned behavior, integrated behavioral model, subjective expected utility, and others. There are other theories that put risk perception as an important element of the message that people consider to accept or reject that message. So for example, protection motivation theory and extended parallel process model, they say if my risk perceptions are there, then you have to consider two other elements of the message, that I can actually do the behavior that's being promoted, and that behavior will actually help eliminate that risk. And so it's really important in even considering or accepting or rejecting a health message. So again, this is the health belief model. Just want to highlight something. So this is susceptibility and severity, as we mentioned, the two dimensions. And they're somehow combined together to make one index. It's called threat. And then this should lead to likelihood of taking behavior. Now, there's one thing that I want to mention. Risk perceptions are important for behavioral change, but they're not the only determinant of behavior change. If I need to join a gym to lose weight, and I really am on board and my risk perceptions are really good, but I can't afford the gym, or the gym is too far away, then that's another barrier to behavior. But we're not addressing those, we're just addressing risk perceptions. So, risk perceptions can be, they're never accurate. As I said, they're subjective. So sometimes they're overestimated. So everybody is afraid that they're going to have a shark, they're going to be attacked by a shark or involved in a plane crash, correct? And then for other risks, they're kind of underestimated. Oh, I don't exercise, but that's okay because it's voluntary risk. I'm choosing to take that risk. So I chose to focus on risks that we underestimate our chances of getting it because it's more detrimental to health. And in health communication, we have done a lot of work here. As I said, we do a lot of message testing and so forth. And we do a lot of evaluations, so we measure outcomes, including risk perceptions, by the way. But I was interested in what happens in here. How do people arrive to those biased estimates of the risk? How do they get there? So going back to the work I told you about the news stories, I said, well, okay, well, people attend to risk messages in light of stored knowledge that they have. And guess what? Because risk messages are personal, what's the schema or the mental representation that's going to be up and running for you to interpret that message? It's going to be the self-schema. So each one of us have a mental representation about me, It's all about me. What do I look like? What do I like? Events, memories, even specific behaviors, opinions, attitudes, and so forth. So when we are interpreting or when we are attending to any self-relevant message, this self-schema is going to be active and help us interpret and attend to that message. But here's the problem. The self-schema is, for most people, positive. What does that mean?
It's not going to happen to me.
It's not going to happen to me. So if I tell you, how is your job going to be? Jessica, it's going to be the best job ever. My marriage is going to be wonderful. My children are going to be the best ever. They're not going to ever have those problems. And studies have shown that children as early as 5 months, they respond better to positive feedback. They like approving voices. Societies endorse these kinds of positive reinforcements, so it becomes built in. So what happens is that we tend to guard ourselves against negative information. So for example, I get a paper rejected. I didn't, but let's say I don't want to jump the gun. I have a paper under review, but so let's say I have a paper rejected, and I had. So what are the reasons? Oh, that reviewer, he just really didn't get the point. But when I get a paper accepted, oh my God, it was good work on my side. So what happens is that we tend to attribute good outcomes to ourselves, whereas bad outcomes, this is just external thing, it's out of my control. Same for health. If I am healthy and fit, that's because I'm taking care of myself. If I'm not, it's just because it's just bad luck. Something else is out of my control. And we do the exact opposite for other people. So if Jessica gets a paper accepted, it's just she's lucky. Okay? So we do the same thing for health. So that's why I think that the self schema will influence our interpretation of risk messages such that it can be rejected, and we tend to underestimate our risks. So let us do a little experiment, and you will be my participants. But there are no incentives. So I'm sorry. So let me go to, okay. So what I will do is that I will read a list of 10 words, and we'll do this for 3 rounds. For the first round, here's what I want you to do. When you hear a positive word, consider that that's me, that's self-descriptive, that describes me. I want you to clap your hands. If you hear a negative word, just don't do anything. It's not descriptive of you. We don't have to worry about that.
But okay. What if I hear a negative word that does describe you?
Well, let's.
No,
there will be another round where I'll give you the choice.
So positive clap, negative don't clap.
Yes. Okay. Ready? Okay. I have to read the word. Sincere. Irresponsible. Boring. Dependable. Intelligent. Greedy. Phony. Reliable. Unkind. Cheerful. Okay. Now, second round. I want you to clap when you hear a negative word. So the negative word, consider it self-descriptive, and I want you to clap. When you hear a positive word, don't clap. Thoughtful, warm, gossipy, jealous, happy, dishonest, trustful, unfriendly, patient, untrustworthy. Okay. Now the third round, that's for Rhonda. So you get a choice. You get a choice. Again, I will read a list of words. Whatever you consider self-descriptive, clap. If you don't consider it self-descriptive, don't clap. Courteous, irritating, polite, forgiving, unreliable, insincere, capable, quarrelsome, untrustful, responsible. Okay. What did you notice?
Daniel lied.
What?
So it took longer for me to clap for negative words.
Okay, that's one thing. What else?
For negative words about me.
What else? We didn't really, not so many people clapped for negative when we had a choice, correct?
Yeah. We have high opinions of ourselves.
Okay. Okay. Okay, so this is pretty much what I did for my dissertation. It was so much fun. So again, going back to what I said, my thinking is the self-schema is going to bias risk perception such that when it's active and it's overly positive, it's going to lead us to reject the risk message and kind of underestimate our risk. So I wanted to test the effects of self-schema activation on measures of risk perceptions. So how do I do that? How do you activate the self? There are several ways in the literature in which you can activate a mental representation. What I did is I primed people with self-identity words like I, me, mine, myself, and so forth. Of course, there were other people who were primed with different words. And I'll say why when it comes to the shortcomings. But my thinking was the neutral should be more similar to the self condition, and then the third person will have a different pattern of result. To prime people, I use two ways. The first one, it's called the scrambled sentence task. So you just give people a set of 5 words, and you ask them to form a grammatically correct sentence using only 4 of the 5. And guess what? Each sentence has one of the primes, I, me, myself, or he or she, depending on the condition that they were in. In the other type of priming, which is subliminal, basically it was under the guise of a visual accuracy task. So basically there will be like an X appearing in the middle of screen, but it will actually be flying from one of the corners, and people will have to tell me they come from top, bottom, left, or right. But actually that X was the prime. It was masked. So people will see X's for 10 milliseconds, and then the prime I for 50, and then another bunch of X's. So that's what we call front and back masks. So they can't really see the prime. It's beyond their conscious awareness. Okay? And then,
They are aware of it? I mean, but subliminally they
yes, yes. So the studies have shown even though your eye can see the prime, it still activates the self schema. And that was the whole point. And then at the end of the day, I measured reaction time and response key. So the clapping, clap, yes. Don't clap, no. And then reaction time, that was measured in milliseconds, how much time it took participants to respond yes or no. Okay?
For how many people?
Oh, I'll tell the number of people. So any questions so far? Okay. Okay, so the first experiment was pretty much what we did here. I had a list of 20 positive, 20 negative words, but I also embedded within those 13 health words and 11 sickness words. Of course, these words were kind of randomized. They were presented in random order to people. Some people had self-primes, and other people had just a letter string. And then I asked them to identify whether each trait is self-descriptive, in which they have to hit yes, or no, it's not self-descriptive, so they have to hit no. Okay? And here is what I found. So I'll always be showing results for response key, that's the clapping, and then reaction time, which is the time it took them to respond. So this is response key, and as we can see that for positive and health, people identified those words as self-descriptive. Okay? Whereas we find exactly the opposite pattern for sickness and negative words. See the pattern bar that says, no, that's not me. Okay?
And can those be read as percentages? So it's like 90%?
No. All responses were averaged across the trait words. So for example, I have 20 positive words. Response key was averaged, so it eventually ended up on a 0 to 1. Okay, because I had health was 13 and sickness was 11, so I wanted everybody to be on the same scale. Okay. If we look at the sickness, highest category that people say, that's not me. That's not me. Okay. Here's the reaction time data. So reaction time is how long it took them to actually hit one of the 2 buttons. If you follow the solid line, saying positive traits and health traits describe me, people were really fast acknowledging this. They were really fast in saying, yes, I am sincere. Yes, I'm warm. Yes, I'm kind. And yes, I'm healthy. Okay? Now, when we look at negative and sickness words and look at the other line, they were really fast in acknowledging that, no, that's not me. So, no, I am not unreliable. And no, I am not sick. If we look up on top with the star, the longest reaction time it took them when they actually acknowledged that they are, that a sickness word describes them. So what does reaction time tell us here? It's telling us that these decisions are really, really accessible. It's really, we are really, really fast in acknowledging that positive and health words are self-descriptive, and it's really hard for us to say that sickness is something that describes me. Okay? Yes?
Can I just ask, I'm sorry if you said this, what's the population here? Are these college students?
These are students, yeah. Yes, so this was, this is experiment 1, so those were about 150 participants, and I will say the number of people as we go with each study. And they were college students. Yes?
So if these are college students, they are actually a pretty healthy population overall. So did you control for?
Yes. Okay. Yes, and I will get to that. Okay. We'll get to the individual differences. And by the way, yes, my sample was all college students, but self-report data have documented this kind of optimism even with older people. Okay, and I will show you something that's really, really cool, but just hold on. Okay.
May I
yeah, of course.
Why do you think it is? Because I'm kind of trying to combine the. Well, I guess first may I just ask, was there a general difference? Not, in other words, collapsing the self-descriptive versus non-self-descriptive. Was there a difference between positive and negative words in terms of reaction time, just in general?
Okay, so the primes did not have an effect in this case, except for one thing I'm going to say about talk about later. So the main difference, or that significant difference, is the trait category. The positive, negative health, sickness was treated as a repeated measure, and that was different. So these differences were significant. All pairwise comparisons were significant. They were different from each other.
Okay, but in terms of like if like the average reaction time for positive words, period, versus
health,
the overall reaction time for negative words.
Yes, it was different.
Okay, so
yes.
Okay, so collapsing those.
Yes.
There was an overall.
Yes.
They were faster with
yes.
the positive words.
Yes.
Whether they felt it described them or not.
Well, there is. I have done analysis combined for yes and no. I'm not showing the results here, but yes, there was a difference. They were faster in responding to positive than sickness, than negative than health, I believe, if I remember the figure correctly. And I had an interpretation for why that happened. But this is split by response key, yes or no. Any other questions? Okay. So study 2, this was 325 people, and again, it was basically the same study. I tried to replicate what I found in the first one, but this time, instead of using sickness and health traits, like I'm healthy, I'm sick, I'm unhealthy, I'm fit, those kinds of words, excuse me, I actually used actual health conditions: asthma, flu, sunburn, stroke, heart attack, those kinds of things. Where did I get these conditions? I did a pilot, and out of 99 health conditions, 50 emerged as familiar to 90% or more of people, so I used those. Of course, all health conditions are negative, so what I did is I took 10 and reworded them to reflect a positive valence. So you will see healthy heart, healthy gums, and so forth. Okay? And then people were asked to respond yes if they're likely to experience that condition, and no if they're not. Again, we see the same pattern. So people identify positive conditions as very likely to happen to them, whereas negative conditions, it's unlikely to happen to them. So we're seeing the same pattern that we saw with the health and sickness traits, only this time with actual health conditions. In terms of reaction time data, and again, this is split by yes and no. So they are fast in identifying, yes, I am likely to experience a positive condition, and the fastest reaction time was saying, no, I am not going to get this. Look at this. This is the fastest of all. Questions? Okay.
Did you expect such big differences?
I was hoping to. I was hoping for.
The dissertation first.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sherine,
Yes.
I'm sorry, I'm still
Okay.
confused. So when you have them split, could you please go back to the previous slide? And
Which one? This
apologize.
one?
This is all me.
This one?
Stupid, yeah.
No, go ahead, man.
Okay, so just looking at the positive things, you've got that 0.9 up there, and then the 0.09. but
Because-
they could either, but the individual would either be
Yes.
in one column or the other.
And that's why they sum together as one.
Right.
Because you can either
That's
say
like
yes or no.
9% of the respondents, right? That responded to that.
Yeah.
About how many people would that be?
Well, it's not, but the thing is, when I did the reaction time, and we can talk about that, but when I did the reaction time, I averaged it across the positive and negative, and as long as the participant has one response no, his reaction time will be included within the mean. So you still had a good, healthy amount of an N to conduct the analysis. I ran into an issue where there was not enough responses in one condition, which is no, so I didn't do an analysis split by yes or no. But for all of these, there was enough N to run an analysis.
So those are means across
Positive
all of the positives.
and all of the
Just looking at
negatives.
the positives, those are so that's the average number of, yes, this is like me.
Yes.
And across those. And so then when you split the yeses and nos,
I have like 40 health conditions that are positive, and I average them across those.
okay.
Every participant does not need to say yes to each of the 40 conditions to be included. As long as he has one reaction time, one yes on any of those 40, his responses will be included. So there was enough N to run the analysis.
Okay.
Okay? Yes.
So in this case, the list of positive health words, those were all pretty sort of abstract in general. Like healthy bones, when I hear that, I have to actually sort of think about what exactly does that mean? Whereas the negative ones were very specific. Leukemia, flu.
Yes.
And it looks like in terms of reaction times that it sort of took people about equal time to deal with these abstract words. Do you think the level of abstraction had something to do with
Well, there is a limitation, as mentioned, that for the experiment one that I showed you, the health and sickness wards, and for this experiment, there aren't really positive health conditions. So, of course, rewording the word, saying healthy bones, healthy heart, it even makes the word longer, so you take longer to respond. So that's a confound. Same with the health and sickness words in the first study, because I didn't want to just use one, so I used several words. But some of them were not really that common among undergraduate students. So, for example, whole or sound, it was used as a positive word, but they took longer to respond to it. And that's when I did the combined reaction time, that was one of the explanation why they took so long to respond to healthy health traits. So yes, that's an issue, but you have to remember that this is a within subjects variable. So each person responded to both positive and negative, so they act as their own control. So again, every person acted as their own control. Yes?
I guess maybe, forgive me if I'm not understanding this, I guess I'm confused in that, so these are college students where we would expect them to answer the positives much quicker because they actually probably have the vast majority of these characteristics already, whereas the negatives are like leukemia and, I mean, So they would have to think about it and then assess their risk in that case, whereas they wouldn't. Does that make
Well,
sense?
but if you say that they will have to think about it, it wouldn't have come out the fastest reaction time. Correct? So yes, there was leukemia, there was cancer, but there was also flu and sunburn and diarrhea and constipation. So it was a mixture of health conditions. Some of them were personality, even disorders. And the whole point of reaction time, it tells us what we can't articulate by words. You don't know what's going on here, so you can't tell me what you're thinking through when you decide whether you're at risk for this or not. But reaction time tells me that if you respond no to negative, that's an accessible decision.
And you're not thinking about it, you're just,
You're-
well, I don't want to read into too much, but maybe you're rejecting even the idea
Yeah.
of thinking about it.
I'm sorry, I was misreading your
Okay. 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 So moving on. So for the third experiment, we'll come back to this later, but I just wanted to show you that these are the health conditions that I have used. And because I have 50 health conditions, that means I will have 50 DVs basically. So that's a lot of, you can't run data on 50 DVs. So what I did is I did a cluster analysis to just group those health conditions according to in homogeneous groups. So they fell together into 3 rare conditions, just like leukemia and HIV. They're really, people consider them to be rare. Some of them are common, like stomach ulcers, diabetes, and so forth. And then some of them are really common diseases like constipation and stress and flu and so forth. So as we move forward, I'll talk about these health clusters and we'll show you the results to them accordingly. So in experiment 3, what I did is that I put a cognitive load on people. The idea is that if you are busy doing something else and you still give me that quick, no, this is not going to happen to me, that means this is an automatic or a very accessible decision. Why? Because it happens even when you don't have enough resources to think about it. So you're not thinking, you're just giving it to me because I'm keeping you busy memorizing these numbers. So people had to memorize in the high load, they had to memorize one of these numbers for every 25 health conditions. And for data to be included, they had to actually get the number correctly. So here are the results. When people are under cognitive load, when they're busy doing something else, when they're memorizing that 8-digit number, they tend to underestimate the risk. Look at that. Across all conditions, people under high cognitive load underestimate the risk. What does that mean? If you're watching TV and you're just busy doing something else and you see one of those risk ads, you're actually not devoting, you're not fully paying attention to that, that's the decision you're going to come to. So when you don't have cognitive resources to think, that is the decision you're going to make. And that's what we call, it's an efficient process. It doesn't need cognitive resources to run. Yes?
This might be a silly question, but I mean, what is the actual risk? Because what if the actual risk evens out with the high load condition? They're actually not overthinking and not overestimating.
It's a very good question. When I say underestimate versus overestimate here, it's relative to the other group, and this is one of the things that I am addressing in one of the studies that we'll talk about toward the end. But when I say underestimate, I'm saying that this group is simply underestimating the risk compared to this.
Okay.
But there is no line for where to draw the risk here.
Okay. I mean, I was thinking kind of like you mentioned shark attacks or something.
Okay.
So maybe
Yeah.
under high load, I would just,
Yeah.
I don't know.
No.
This might actually be accurate versus
No.
if I weren't under high load and I was watching it really intently and looking
No.
at the shark attacks. Like,
No,
oh, yeah,
no, you're right, and it's one of the studies that we're doing right now. And so this pattern was evident across the board. Everybody under cognitive load, they underestimate the risk. Excuse me. Now, I've been talking since the beginning that, oh my God, the self-schema is the source of this bias, correct? But so far, every condition I have showed you, the prime did not have an effect. Really bad. But believe it or not, it did have an effect in three conditions. Rare conditions, remember those rare conditions, leukemia, HIV, I think bone cancer was in there. So people here, when they were primed with the self-primes, I, me, myself, they underestimated the risk compared to those two other conditions. So priming participants with self-identity words led them to underestimate the likelihood of getting one of those rare conditions. It also led them to underestimate the severity of these diseases, but only when they were under high cognitive load. So if we look at these two, you will find that the high load condition was significantly lower than the low load condition. So there was an interaction effect here between the prime and the load.
So say that in English.
So priming people with self-identity words led them to underestimate the risk. So actually the self-schema biased risk perceptions downward, the way I predicted it to be. But only for one cluster or one group of diseases, which is the rare conditions. Okay? Yes.
Thinking like a reviewer,
Yes.
if I were looking at that, I would say that you have more of a case for arguing why third person didn't yield effects, because it looks like neutral has the same effect.
Yes, so actually this and this were similar, which is what I had hoped for going into this. I thought that the third person prime would block the activation of self-schema and would actually have higher risk estimates, but it didn't work my way.
So is it more than that when you're priming with third person kinds of words, we're actually suppressing our concept of self, whereas because we're just egotistic human beings in the neutral condition, it's just kind of already there?
That's that's exactly the explanation I used, is that the self primes did not work as was predicted in basically all the conditions, because it's a highly accessible, it's chronically there, so it might have been active within other conditions even though they were primed with something else. So again, it's something we're trying to work on. Okay, so some of the really cool things that I found here. I want you to consider this. I plotted these 50 health conditions among two dimensions. So this is susceptibility and this is severity. Now remember, health behavior theories, they say susceptibility and severity, they have to be multiplied together or added together to make an index of risk perceptions. But look what I found. So the rare groups, the rare cluster, they are low on susceptibility and high on severity. Okay? So cancer, it's really bad to get cancer, correct? But I am not going to get it. Familiar conditions kind of fall in between. They're kind of moderate on susceptibility and severity, like diabetes. Look at that. Diabetes is somewhere here. It's on a 3 and maybe a 4. Whereas common conditions, they're really high on susceptibility and low on severity. I'm going to get the flu. Everybody gets the flu, but it's not going to be bad. It's not going to be fatal. It's not going to be that harmful. And this is something really important, and we'll talk about the implications right now. So going forward with this inverted relationship that I found, this is 70 people, and this was the pilot work that I did. And you can see that susceptibility is low for rare, goes up a little higher for familiar, and then goes way up for common. Severity is the opposite direction. Questions?
And this is perceived.
It's perceived. It's all perceptions. It's all perception. This is what people see those diseases as.
And so it tends to be that way realistically, but maybe not to the extent that we perceive it. But they're in opposition.
This is correlational data. So there is no manipulation of any sort here. So this is perception. It might be based on reality. It might be based on perception. But it is what it is. This is what they see those clusters to be.
So we're not willing to believe we are highly susceptible to anything we consider high severity.
Yes. 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 Yes.
Clarification.
That's what I'm wondering.
Yeah.
Oh, clarification
Yes.
on the familiar items. What were the familiar illnesses again?
So there were like 26 basically, but you can see the ones that don't have a box. So diabetes, stomach ulcer,
So the reason I was thinking that is that when you think about familiar, you know, there's a common like the flu that most anyone could get, and then there's a familiar that certain people get, but it's more common. The rare is like very few people get. For the familiar condition, I couldn't help but think that's where you start to see comparison processes. It's not just, you're not thinking about yourself, but you're thinking about people who might have those conditions. So you might be making a judgment about these familiar conditions based on previous experience with others.
it could be. I need to say that when I did the cluster analysis, basically the driving force was prevalence. So if a disease was perceived to be prevalent, this is how the diseases fell into clusters basically. All the other risk characteristics did not matter. So yes, it was basically prevalence. The more prevalent the disease is, we are willing to accept the chances we are going to get it, but we don't think it's going to be severe. The more severe the disease is, we say, oh, but it's not going to happen to me. Okay? Same result in another study. Again, it's this inverted relationship across the three conditions. And here I measured third person. So what are the chances that an average other will get this disease? And we see that it's exhibiting the same pattern. So our perceptions of what other people will get is pretty much similar to ours. Okay? The third study that I did with the cognitive load, again, showed the same result, average across all conditions. So susceptibility is low, moderate, high, and severity is the opposite direction. What's really cool is that the reaction time data shows us how accessible these decisions are. So let's look at the stars. So for rare and familiar conditions, saying yes, these diseases are severe, and no, it's not going to happen to me, is really fast on reaction time. People are really fast making those decisions. Again, saying, which indicates this is a very accessible decisions. Whereas for common, you see the exact opposite. People are really fast in saying, yes, I am going to get the flu, but no, it's not going to be severe. And this is reaction time data.
And this is within subject view, right?
Yes, yes. Questions? Okay, so let's think what that means. First of all, if we consider only one dimension of risk, that's not going to work, because a health campaign might actually increase perceptions of susceptibility to the flu, and everybody would be happy. Yay, we got the audience to actually acknowledge that they're risk. But what we don't know is that they're underestimating severity on the other hand. If we take the two approaches that are advocated in health behavior theories to either multiply or add, I just took the liberty of putting 4 hypothetical conditions with different susceptibility and severity ratings, added them, multiplied them, and plotted them along with respect to the mean and standard deviation. And if you see here that diseases or health conditions change their respective positions with the mean if you use a multiplicative index versus an additive index. So for example, the low condition, low on severity, low on susceptibility, is beyond 1 standard deviation below the mean when you add, but it's within 1 standard deviation if you multiply. The high-low, the blue circle, is above the mean when you add, it's below the mean when you multiply. So basically what I'm trying to say is that we really have to consider susceptibility and severity as individual, independent concepts, and you just can't add them or multiply them or consider them separately without considering the other, because it leads to inconsistent results. Questions?
So that's primarily a measurement issue, isn't it, in terms of how these other theories have addressed severity and susceptibility? They've always just added them together, or they've multiplied them.
But it's also a conceptual issue.
Yeah, surely, yes.
So, I mean, whether you multiply or add, and that's why I have that box over there, but because we're running out of time. So basically, if you multiply and you have a condition that's having a 0 on one of the 2 scales, that's basically negating the risk, correct? Because any number times 0 is a 0. So it makes a difference what type of scale you use and whether you add or multiply. But conceptually, the behavior change theories need to consider these 2 dimensions as separate concepts that are really independently important and contribute to behavior.
So given campaigns largely are trying to scare the pants off of people, what should they be doing instead then if they're kind of shooting themselves in the foot?
We can get, we'll get to the practical implications, but I think they need to address both. You can't just focus on one dimension, because basically people will, okay, you're freaking me out that I'm going to get this, so basically they downplay the other dimension automatically. They just do it. Okay, one other really cool thing, not that what I have shown you is not really cool or anything, but this is one of the really important things that I was very pleased to. So those are the traditional variables that we consider in health communication. Did not make one bit of a difference. Self-efficacy, locus of control, so forth. What made a difference? And that's what's really cool. Age, depression, and optimism. So as we age, people who are older, they underestimated severity. Why is that? When we go older, we tend to get sick, correct? There is no denying we have more occurring health problems. So what happens is, in my view, is that optimism shifts to severity. Yes, I have diabetes, but it's going to be okay. Okay? The other thing is optimism and depression. And the reason I think those are really cool, because those reflect either positive or negative self-schemas. So when we change the content of that self-schema, you get a different output as far as risk perceptions. Again, it's another indication that the self-schema is really the source driving these risk perceptions. So if you have someone who is really optimistic, they have a hard time with susceptibility and severity. They just underestimate it. They have slow reaction times, whereas people who are depressed have the opposite pattern. So it's basically the same thing. So questions? Okay. The last experiment, basically I manipulated perceived control, and perceived control is one of the variables that are frequently used in health campaigns. Again, we want to think people are in control of the disease because it makes them efficacious and so forth. But guess what? If you think you can prevent the disease by action that you can take, it leads to decreased severity. So when you read an article about a disease that you can control, So for example, much is known about how a person becomes infected. Prevention includes blah, blah, blah. People show decreased level of susceptibility, severity, and they don't seek information. I had a behavioral measure and they did not seek information. Whereas people who read about a disease that's beyond their control, they actually had heightened risk perceptions and they sought additional information about the disease. Bearing in mind that baseline data was constant across the two conditions. Questions? Okay, I'm gonna wrap up. So this is basically the last thing I'm gonna show you, hopefully. This is a model that reflects my thinking of how self-schemas influence or bias risk perception through different routes of information processing. So I can show you one ad and we can just walk you through the model. Oh my God. Oh, I don't think it's gonna work. Okay. Well, okay, let me just tell you the ad. So basically the ad was just similar to the one we saw. You know, syphilis rates are up like 365% and get yourself checked and so forth. So what I think is happening is that because the ad references the self by you are at risk for get yourself checked, so the self schema gets activated. And we are aware of that triggering stimulus because you can see the word you, so you're consciously aware of it. But that leads to the self-schema becoming active. In the direct path, you don't have motivation to learn about syphilis. You don't care. You don't really have time. So what will happen is that you will basically disregard the message because it's inconsistent with the self-schema, which is overly positive. But in the indirect path, let's say you really want to learn about syphilis. So you start engaging in the message and you want to go through an elaborate process